Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. I'm Mark Benicevic, and it's my absolute pleasure once again to spend time with Professor Coral Ingley. Welcome back, Professor. Thank you very much for your time. So Dr. Ingley was the first person in New Zealand to get a PhD in governance and was a Professor of Management at the Auckland University of Technology for many years. Is on the board of what will become the Chartered Governance Institute of New Zealand, is Governance New Zealand, and on the board of the international body, the Chartered Governance Institute, which is a number of Commonwealth countries' organisations around governance. So an incredible wealth of experience in governance, has written many academic articles and done a lot of research in this space, and it's an absolute privilege to spend time with you. So thank you very much again, Coral.
Thank you, Mark. I'm delighted to be here to talk about governance with you.
Thank you. So today the topic we're going to talk about is greenwashing. We spoke last time about the trend towards environmental, social and governance reporting and management, or governance really, that has risen in the last decade or so. And one of the major concerns, I know the Financial Markets Authority had released something on this really a few months ago about this risk of greenwashing, and how they were very against entities that were greenwashing. So what is it?
Yes, well, greenwashing is making false, misleading, or otherwise incomplete statements or claims about the sustainability of a product or a service or a business operation. Some greenwashing is unintentional, from lack of knowledge maybe on the part of managers, but sometimes it's also carried out intentionally, you might say in order to deceive through marketing efforts. And it may happen as a result of management not really understanding the level of rigour required to prepare and present high quality ESG disclosures, for instance. Alternatively, it might be that there are vague statements made or claims about sustainability efforts in annual reports to make it seem like they are doing more than perhaps they really are in integrating something like an ESG analysis.
Okay, so as such, any entity that falls under the Financial Markets Conduct Act would fall foul of Part 2, the misleading and deceptive provisions. And I think that would capture quite a lot of companies in New Zealand, that act.
We've seen a lot of examples that have been profiled in the media. And of course, this is a thing that raises awareness around the need to report on sustainability issues, as we talked about in the previous session. Mm-hmm. But also, it brings companies under much closer scrutiny from institutional investors looking to invest in those companies, from the FMA certainly. Mm-hmm. From stakeholders generally, though, and of course the profile of the company, which is found to be not quite as squeaky clean as they would like to project, does ultimately potentially damage their reputation in the market.
So at the very least, it suggests that all directors should be upskilling themselves in the area of ESG to ensure that they don't accidentally fall foul of greenwashing.
Yes.
What does a board of directors need to do to avoid accusations of greenwashing?
Well, avoiding the perception of greenwashing means presenting your disclosures and using a reputable global reporting framework, ideally, like the GRI initiative framework, the Global Reporting Initiative, something like the Principles for Responsible Investment, which is the PRI, or a sustainability accounting standards board. There are others as well, which have developed frameworks that can be used for reporting more rigorously on sustainability efforts. And they require that the presentation of sustainability information, particularly the ESG framework, is standardised and comparable. It's important to follow the disclosure best practices, and that requires the inclusion of a considerable amount of data and metrics. So the rigour that's involved is quite demanding of companies. And I guess one of the considerations is the size of the company and its resource for being able to capture that kind of information and report it. But increasingly, it is being integrated with the annual financial report.
Yes.
And increasingly, it is being taken into account with investors looking to invest in the company, not just the big institutional investors.
Absolutely. So the starting point then would be to investigate these various different frameworks, find the one that would benefit the company to the strongest degree, implement that framework in the business, and to start with it'll be collecting information and identifying where the gaps are, and then lifting the business to fill those gaps and reporting on that information. And in doing so, they'll identify where they actually aren't as up to speed as they maybe think they are with a high level
Definitely.
perusal.
I think it shines a light potentially very deeply into the business, where I guess a lot of those risks reside or emerge. But I think that the benefit is that it gives the company a much greater insight into their operations and a better understanding of the business and those risks, but not only the risks, the opportunities as well.
Right. So although it will, as you said before, it can be quite rigorous and complex, so it will introduce some cost into the business. But as you mentioned in the last interview, research shows that companies that follow ESG principles tend to outperform companies that don't. On the whole, of course, there's always exceptions.
Well, it's the long term that we're looking at here.
Yes.
It's long-term sustainability rather than short-term returns. But then ESG, talking about ESG companies, tend to perform or return better returns to shareholders in the short term as well.
It's probably a case, as you said before, with a rising tide of investors looking at ESG reporting, and of course the share price being a reflection of the company's long-term value, they'll be willing to pay higher share prices for companies that have really fully integrated this and are reporting good information. So that will probably drive the short-term returns, won't it, in terms of its capital gain?
Yes, it's about creating stakeholder value, isn't it? And companies that are seen to be acting ethically. And when we're talking about that, I mean, some of the pitfalls with, you talked about avoiding greenwashing and avoiding that inadvertently, greenwashing inadvertently. And there's other terms too, there's brownwashing and various other, you can imagine colours. But examples are where maybe a product is being emphasised as produced and or packaged using recycled materials, but they neglect to mention that it was sourced from perhaps a supplier with a history of coercive labour practices, for instance, or humanitarian issues. And of course, some of the very big companies have been caught out with that kind of inadvertent, if you like, or at least being publicised as not being, as we say, squeaky clean in looking at their supply chains and who is in the supply chain and what are they doing.
So it requires some really serious due diligence on all of the company's suppliers to be able to make these claims.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think even in recent days I've seen questions about businesses, I'm thinking brain drinks, where they're making apparently unsubstantiated claims about whether the products that they are selling and marketing as having specific properties for brain enhancement, if you like, or brain health, are actually live up to those claims. And so it's not just about whether they can actually, whether they are claiming those benefits, but whether they can actually substantiate them, and whether they stand up to that scrutiny.
Right, absolutely. So this is part of a very broad, as you talked about before, when you adopt a framework like this that goes very deeply into the company and requires a lot of work around understanding the sources of supply, understanding the impacts of the business on the environment, understanding the impacts of the business on its society, collecting good information, analysing the information well and reporting it, which means that everything that you do can be substantiated. You can be able to stand behind it with evidence and say, this is the work that we did to make that claim.
Yes, definitely. I think it's not just about collecting the data and having fancy metrics. It's about understanding what that data is telling you and how it is translated into how the business operates. So that's really important. I think we've moved far beyond the days when it was seen to be enough to be doing good and or to be recycling paper, for instance. Sustainability and transparency around that is very important now, and it's not enough even just for companies to decide that they're going to bolt on a ESG or a sustainability component to their business. It's got to be holistic and expose the entire business to that deep scrutiny.
So we've alluded to this a little bit through the conversation, but I think it's worthwhile just asking it as a specific question to draw the threads together. What then are the benefits of running a business according to ESG principles, given the cost we've talked about of getting in and really understanding what's going on?
Well, of course, greenwashing has closely been connected with or linked with ESG. And of course, what we're really talking about is sustainability disclosure and a broader concept which ESG aims to encapsulate. But the benefits to the business, obvious one, of course, if it's a candidate, if it's a company in which institutional investors are interested, then being able to attract capital for new investment is a key one. Businesses can, if they're seen to be sustainably active and reporting and transparent, are able to attract talent, and they are also able to gain the trust or build the trust of their stakeholders, which is a really important thing, certainly since the global financial crisis, and after any kind of wave of business collapses. It's always an issue dealing with the loss of confidence in the market that accompanies those collapses.
So it feels like the underlying value of running a business according to ESG principles comes from consumers and initially driven by institutions becoming more demanding that businesses are more responsible and more sustainable, which makes them are less likely to collapse as the result of some blindsided risk because they're far more engaged around their risk management. And because people are demanding companies become more responsible in this way, companies have to live up to that, or investors won't be as interested in them. We're already seeing a lot of, at least negative screening and investment. We're seeing a lot more investing organisations being very selective about the companies they deal with and dropping munitions, tobacco, in some cases quite broad in terms of what they're dropping. So that will reduce their share prices. So it's really being driven by the market, which is quite exciting, isn't it?
It is. Some reports or forecasts suggest that half of all investments, institutional investments, will be in ESG funds, companies in the coming 5 years. So it is really big. It's becoming much more an imperative for business and a top priority. But I think also there's the factors of protecting reputation, being seen honestly to be upholding sustainability practices, and to be having much greater insight into their own risks and how they're managing those. But also, it's not just about screening out the negatives. It's about screening in the positives. Yes. As well. And certainly the fund managers and institutional investors are looking very much more at those now, where perhaps the initial concern was looking at screening out the negatives.
Right. Well, that's been very cool. Thank you. Just a broad question, I think, to finish off, in terms of your extensive governance knowledge and experience. What key piece of advice would you give somebody who is moving into a governance career?
Oh dear, who am I to give advice? But I think thinking about advice I've been given and thinking about the demands of a directorship, whether it be the first or subsequent directorships. The first thing I think that is really important is to do your due diligence thoroughly on any company or organisation whose board you are being considered for or are considering sitting on. I think that this applies to any director position, whether it's for profit or for purpose organisations, but especially with a publicly listed company, and especially in environmentally and or socially impacted sectors, or connected to those through supply chains or ownership structures or investment structures. I think that it is really important to think about what you have to contribute to this company or organisation and why you want the role. Do you have the time, the capability and the capacity to serve this board and meet your governance duties and obligations? And realise that your first directorship isn't going to make you a seasoned director, that it takes quite some time to understand an organisation and become fully effective in that role, director role. And as we've mentioned, continuing professional development is really helpful in keeping you up to speed and centred. But I also think that finding a mentor is a good idea too, especially one who can act as a sounding board for the invariable challenges that you will encounter in your directorship role.
That's an amazingly extensive piece of advice. Thank you. I'm going to try and summarise some of that back to you because it was so thorough. Thank you. So first up, doing your due diligence, making sure that the company that you're going to accept a role for is somebody that aligns with your values. So because your reputation is going to be tied to that company's reputation. So making sure that you are moving into the right business, not just accepting any role that comes along. And then making sure that you have time to dedicate to the role, because it is an important and a large role to take on, and thinking about what value you can add to the company. So it's got this two-way match. What are you bringing to the table and what do they have that aligns with your values? And then as a director, continue your development. An entity like Governance New Zealand will be a really great organisation to be a member of, so that you can stay on top of the major issues and the trends and things that we've spoken about before, and having a really strong mentor that you can sound difficult things off. Does that summarise?
Very well, thank you, Mark. It's brilliant.
That was really cool advice. Thank you. That was great. So, Coral, again, thank you very much for your time. It's been a really cool conversation. I'll look forward to catching up again soon.
Oh, indeed. Thank you, Mark.
And I'll look forward to seeing you next episode. Thank you.